pace and a little bit more, that's all right. And a little bit more challenging sometimes when we have those problematic behaviors. So my goal for the end of today is that you will be able to differentiate between a risk and a consequence, have some tools in your tool belt that you can use to brainstorm intervention ideas with people who are struggling with some problematic behaviors, and that you will also increase your willingness to find solutions for tenants to stay in housing. So my role today is really just to facilitate us getting through the material to keep us on task. I'm going to try to keep us on time, but I also get very excited about this topic. And so, you know, we will all work together to end on time today. And then I hope that you will also actively participate in this group. The trainings that I like to do, I can only listen to myself talk for so long, but I really want some interaction. And so there will be plenty of opportunity for us to do that today. So one thing that I have recently learned that has changed the way I interact with others is a phrase called stealth expectations. And it's essentially when you interact with someone and you have an expectation of how that is going to go, but you don't tell that person what your expectation is. And then you get mad or resentful or agitated that they are not reading your mind and doing exactly what you want them to do. So I decided that I should probably let you all know what my expectations are today. Number one, I expect that you are all here because you want to keep people housed, that we are here for the purpose of ending homelessness and keeping people in housing. My second expectation is that you are open to ideas that might stretch your comfort level a little bit. And my third, I already mentioned, is that you will be actively engaged. So can I get an emoji thumbs up if y'all are in agreement with those expectations? Yeah, or a visual, Sheila, that works too. Thank you. All right. So step one, done on our agenda. So one of the things that I have noticed when I work with staff who are new to supportive housing is that I often hear that they want policies or a flow chart of how to respond to problematic behaviors when they see them in clients or tenants. And I have yet to find a good policy, though I do love a good policy, but I've yet to find one that actually addresses all the different possibilities of the problematic behaviors that we might encounter. Even when we have tried to write policies, then there's all these extenuating circumstances that you didn't plan for. And so you end up having to say, well, does this policy really apply anyway? And then same thing, if you're trying to design specific actions, there's often a wide range of behaviors that might fall within a certain behavior group. So for example, maybe you have a rule that there is no drugs in the unit. Well, if you are doing a unit inspection and you find a joint in one unit and you find a kilo of heroin in another unit, we are probably not going to be treating those two instances the same, yet they technically would both fall under that policy. So we want to make sure that we're really taking a look at all of the different aspects of these behaviors that people might exhibit and use that to define and decide what our interventions will be. All right, so that is going to bring us to our very first activity. So I am told that maybe you have worked with a Jamboard before. Anybody familiar with Jamboard? I see a couple nodding heads. If you have not, it's essentially a virtual whiteboard. So pretend we were all in a room together with sticky notes, and we're going to do it electronically. And what we've got on this virtual Jamboard, and I'll give you the link in a minute, is that I have written out a bunch of different possible behaviors that you might see from people who are living in supportive housing. And I want you to group those. You can work together as a group. You'll be able to unmute and talk amongst yourselves. Work together as a group to decide whether you would evict. You would definitely evict for that behavior, that it depends on more circumstances, or you would definitely not evict for that behavior. And you'll be able to move those sticky notes around on the Jamboard. I'm only going to give you 5 minutes for this. This could last the entire time, this discussion, but I'm going to ask you to kind of make some decisions quickly and get going with it. And so here is the Jamboard. If you want to use your phone, you can take a picture of that QRL. Or you can see if it will let me copy. I've got to find where I can copy that URL for you so you can click it. I was going to put it in the chat as well. Now I have to find the chat. See, I told you that Zoom was my second favorite. There we go. Okay. So I am going to push this over here. So if you are in the Jamboard, it looks like a lot of you are in the Jamboard. You will have an anonymous little symbol. It's hard to even know what yours are. Yeah, and somebody started moving those around. So this is my pile of sticky notes. And what I want you to do is just start moving them around on would not evict. It depends. I might evict for that behavior, or I would definitely evict for that behavior. And if there starts to be a sticky note war where people are moving it back and forth, getting territorial, definitely that's where we should have some discussion. So anybody struggling to get to the Jamboard, it looks like most people are there. Y'all can talk about this too if you would like to take yourselves off mute.
What do you mean by having trash throughout the unit? Like, is it like you're just like garbage and stuff, or is it like completely destroyed type of like you're ruining furniture and type of thing? Just like garbage in the unit?
Yeah, garbage, food wrappers, empty beer cans. Yeah, just looks like somebody maybe has not taken the trash out for a month.
Okay, so it's not like the hoarding show where
Not the
everything is
hoarding
just like
show yet, no.
okay.
but it could get there. Yeah.
And now, are these like one-time instances, like this happened, or are they like, are we assuming that they're continuously like not paying rent or?
It could be either. And so that might be something for you where it would depend. Like if it's a first time incident, I wouldn't evict, but if it happened 5 times in a row, maybe I would. So that is why there's that middle column for it depends.
So many, it depends. I love this group is like, more information, please.
Yes. Yes. I was purposely vague on some of them. Okay, we've got about 1 minute left, and I'm seeing some of them kind of moving over the line. You're having trouble deciding which column it goes into. All right. Usually there's also one person in the group who likes everything to be in an order and in a line and tries to straighten them up in rows and columns. I'm not seeing quite as much of that in this group, but that always makes me laugh when that happens. So what I'm seeing, I'm not sure exactly where we're at with this kind of line over here, but I'm seeing keeping automotive parts in the unit, not cleaning themselves, refusing to participate in case management. Those are definitely things we're not evicting for. It looks like people are agreed on physical violence, not allowing pest control to enter, not having an animal on, or having an animal that's not on the lease, and keeping a firearm would be reasons to evict. And then everything else is, it depends. Is that pretty much what I'm reading?
Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to just comment and say not allowing pest control to enter. You know, I would think that would go over it it depends. I mean, it's just a routine thing. You know, I don't think it's something to be evicted for, but give them a warning or whatever, you know,
Okay.
and allow that, you know, allow them to fix it next time.
Yeah.
I think so many of these things could fall under the it depends, you know, maybe one warning is one thing, but if every day you're having complaints and having to revisit the issue and there's no resolution and no solution that, you know, both parties can come to, that may not be the best fit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. It's just going to depend on where you are in the process with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so good news is that today we're really focused on the middle column. So the things you know for sure that you're not going to evict for, you don't need my help for that. And the things that you know for sure that you will evict for, you don't need my help for that. So we're going to talk about all these things in the middle column and what we can do about those, and how to create interventions that are going to help support someone staying housed. All right, so back to the presentation. We will come back to the Jamboard in a minute. Trying to find all of my screens. There we go. Okay. So just a quick note on evictions. Even in supportive housing, evictions are valid for certain behaviors. And so although the majority of what we're talking about today is trying to prevent evictions, I do want to make sure that you all understand that there are some times when that is valid. And our commitment really is to assist that tenant in finding alternative housing if we do have to evict. So a typical landlord, you're going to serve an eviction notice and they kind of want to be done with the tenant. And really, when we're talking about supportive housing, we want to help that tenant find somewhere else that might be a better fit for them. Staff safety is paramount, so we got to make sure that the staff who may have been involved in the incident are not going to be maybe the ones that are supporting them into the next housing option. We definitely don't want to re-traumatize anyone. And sometimes the clients or tenants don't want that support to move on. Sometimes they're mad, and that's okay. That's their choice too, but we're there for them. And then if we are going to help them through another agency, we want to make a warm handoff. Sometimes that might mean just having a joint phone call with the tenant and the new agency to say, like, here's what's been going on. Here's the support I think they need. Sometimes they might go, you might go with them or have someone on your team go with them to the new agency, just to make sure that they really get that connection. So we want to make that handoff as warm as possible and as safe as possible. All right. So as we then think about these behaviors where we are going to hopefully keep them in housing, we want to talk about the difference between risk and consequence. And so when we talk about risk, it is important to distinguish between the severity of what already happened versus the likelihood and severity of something bad that might happen in the future. So a consequence is really something that's a direct result of some past action, where when we're talking about risk, we're thinking about what might potentially happen in the future. And consequences happen. Sometimes they're natural consequences, sometimes we impose them. If you don't pay your rent on time, there might be a late fee. That's a consequence from what happened. But the risk to the landlord is, will this client continue to not pay their rent in the future, right? So that would be the risk. There's a lot of different tools out there to evaluate risk. And I am a certified instructor for Crisis Prevention Institute's Nonviolent Crisis Intervention. And so I like their tool, and I'm going to use their tool because I think it's really simple to understand. So we really are looking at two things. What's the likelihood that bad action might happen again in the future? And then also, what is the severity of that if it were to happen? So for example, if we were using the example of someone not paying their rent. So say they don't pay their rent 3 months in a row, what's the likelihood that they're going to continue not paying their rent? Well, we might be getting kind of high, right? Medium or high there on likelihood. What's the severity of that action? As a supportive housing provider, I would say that the severity is low. But it's not, I don't manage the books. So somebody else might think, it's medium. Usually when we're talking about high severity, we're talking about loss of life, limb, loss of business, losing a license, things like that usually are what we're talking about with the high severity. Any questions about this risk matrix and talking about likelihood and severity? Okay. Then we are going to jump back into our Jamboard. And as this happens, I am going to read you a scenario. And what I want you to do is, as you learn about the scenario, I'm going to have you decide where to put a little marker. So if you go to the Jamboard up at the top, you'll see this 1 of 3, and you want to go to the next frame to where it is 2 of 3. And then once you're there, this toolbar over on the left, you see a little one that says it's a circle. You can pick any shape that you like, but go ahead and make yourself a shape and put it somewhere on the risk matrix. So I'm going to choose a little square right there. Yep, somebody's got a diamond. a square. You can change the color. You can express yourself however you want through your shapes. Oh, okay. Looks like we've got several popping up. A lot of people liking the arrows. Arrows are good.
Could you show where to get the shape again? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Over kind of 2/3 of the way down on the left.
It's not showing on the phone.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's not showing
Oh.
on the phone.
No, I'm not getting it either.
Oh, no. I've never tried to do this from the phone. Is anybody on a phone getting it? Okay. So if you're not getting it on the phone, then do it mentally in your head or with your finger, just kind of point and just kind of keep track of whether it moves. So as you learn more about the scenario, you may decide to move your little marker around. And we'll go ahead and get started for those of you who have it. I'm sorry for those of you who don't. Yeah, you could do a little, will it let you do a sticky note or a pen or anything on the phone?
There's no toolbar.
There's no toolbar. That's awful. Okay, that's good for me to know for the future though. Thank you. All right, so here, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Bring back that Jamboard so I can see what y'all are doing. All right, so the scenario is that Bill and his neighbor Marco get into an argument over Bill's dog doing its business on the front of Marco's door, and Bill didn't pick it up. The argument escalates, and Bill punches Marco in the nose. So when you think right now of that scenario, these are two tenants of yours, where would you put the likelihood and severity of a risk of a future bad consequence happening or a future bad action happening? And you can go ahead and place it wherever you want it on the matrix. All right. Oh, somebody cleared it. There is a button that says clear. And so if you want to put you want to do it again, that's okay. That happens once every time. I forgot to warn you. I don't remember where the button is myself, but it does happen.
That's low risk. That's low risk. It won't happen again.
Okay. All right, so it looks like most people have it in medium to high likelihood, medium severity. Okay, so here I'm going to give you a little bit more information about this. So Bill's dog is an emotional support dog for his PTSD diagnosis. And Bill and Marco have been friends for many years, and they often get into verbal yelling matches, but it's never escalated to physical violence before today. Does that change where you would put the risk off? And if so, you can go ahead and move your little marker. Couple people moving, a lot of people staying the same. Okay. So you decide to go and have a conversation with Bill after the incident, and you find out that he was just informed this morning that his dog was diagnosed with cancer, and he's really been struggling with the idea of losing his primary emotional support for his PTSD. Does that change the risk at all? All right. Sorry, it keeps, if you're watching Zoom and the Jamboard keep jumping back and forth. Does it change things any if Bill and Marco both calm down, they come back together, they shake hands, and they tell you everything's fine, please don't let Bill get in trouble for this, we're all good, we're friends again, it was a misunderstanding? Okay. What about if Bill had gotten into physical altercations with others in the past, but he's always been able to resolve them on his own? Does that change anything?
Is that how are you saying? Does this shape placement pertain to just this one situation or that addition of information? Because I mean, I definitely.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's addition of information. And then does it change things at all if during the incident today, one of the other neighbors who was not involved in the incident called the police and Bill was given a citation for battery? All right. So that's the end of our what ifs. What I saw was a lot of things moving around a little bit, but I'm going to have you all do some reflection too. So did you all agree on where the risk level was every time?
No.
No. And so why do you think that is, that people would have differing of opinions on where the risk might lie?
I think personal experience might have something to do with it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with Chico on the personal experience. Some people might get very frightened with any type of physical altercation, so it might be different for them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Any other reasons?
I think agency policies can also differ a lot on risk.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and experience. I believe experience probably has a lot to do with it. You know, I've never done anything like this, so I was all the way at the end as far as severity, even though, you know, nobody died. At some point I was in the most severe.
Yeah. Yeah, your experience, your policies, all of that's going to play into it for sure. And your perspective, right? If you're the one in charge of security at the facility, or you're the one in charge of leasing up new units, I know that there are different types of requirements based on the different types of housing that you get. There's the crime-free designation and those types of things that might play into it as well. So different people are going to have different perspectives, and that's good. We want different perspectives. We really want people to come together and have a conversation about this. What I like about the risk matrix tool is that it gives us some common language to say, well, I see this as more severe because this might impact our ability to stay licensed, or, you know, this could turn into, you know, further physical violence, where someone else might say, hey, you know what, I think with a little case management and some additional support, you know, around Bill and how he's going to manage his PTSD, you know, if his dog passes, like maybe we can get him the right support that he needs. And so depending on what who is involved in your team, you might have those differences of opinions, and it's important to hear all sides and make sure that everyone knows that their perspective is valid, and then come together and figure out where can we go from here. So your main job is to protect the organization that you're working for, the staff, and the tenant to maintain their housing. And so while that is challenging, it's also possible, and sometimes just takes a little bit of creativity. So we are going to do a little problem solving activity together. But before we do that, I have a quick poll. If you can just put in the chat, how many times can a tenant repeat the same problem behavior before it leads to eviction?
Could I also add that I just found it interesting how during the Jamboard, all of us said like if it was physical violence, we would evict them immediately. And now based on the story, we're sort of at low severity or like medium severity.
That is a really good point, Aina. Thank you for saying that. And did I say your name correctly?
It's Aina.
Aina. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yes,
okay.
But very good point.
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess when you attach a name and a personal story to things, it sort of changes our perspectives.
Yeah.
Rather than just having physical violence written there.
Yeah. I'm glad to see that. That is very encouraging from a service provider and supportive housing viewpoint. So that's great. And it looks like in terms of the group, most people are kind of a 3 strikes you're out kind of philosophy. I do see some, it depends, if it's severe enough, 1, yeah, we talked about some of what those could be, although Aina then called us all out on that. And yeah, so I will tell you my answer to how many times is that as many times as it takes to get a solution that will work. That's my answer. That's the philosophy.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so because sometimes I mean, almost everything can be placed in an it depends. Are there such thing as a black and white that's high risk and that's too severe?
So, that is for you and your organization to decide. At my organization, depending on the type of housing someone is in, so we have some transitional housing where people are 3 to 4 people per room. And so the risk level of someone getting into a physical altercation is much higher there than if someone has their own unit. So in that particular transitional housing setting, we do have if it's physical violence, you are discharged and we'll help you find another place to live. In other housing, in our permanent supportive housing, it is a little less black and white, though there are certain things, usually abuse towards someone of a derogatory nature will generally lead to an eviction. Lots of repeated drug activity, selling or manufacturing in the unit might lead to an eviction. But in the world of social work, things are really gray.
Well, it's almost like I'm going to say that the max is actually if there's a crime committed and then there's police involved, then there's no reason to keep the person there. I mean, you have to evict, right? I mean,
you might have that rule. Some people do. For us, it depends on the crime.
So it depends. Oh, okay.
Yeah, if it wasn't committed on our property or it's public intoxication, like we're probably not going to evict for that, even though you could get arrested for it.
Okay.
Any type of violence with a weapon, we are definitely going to evict. So, but it's a good question. And that's why I said the policies are really hard to write because there's always that, well, what if scenario? Yeah.
And then you go through the process of evaluating whether it's a federal
Yeah.
federal law or state law, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so for us, like I said, we are really here to think about how many times will it take to get to a solution that will work, assuming the risk is low enough to keep everyone safe. So there always is that caveat. If we feel like staff aren't safe, if we feel like the other tenants aren't safe, that to me is where you move to that eviction and transitioning to another housing. But if we can keep people safe, for example, we had a client who was with us for a long time in permanent supportive housing, and 10 months in a row, this client did not pay his rent. And he was struggling with gambling. And 10 months in a row, our staff came to him and met with him and said, what are we going to do about this? You gambled your rent money away. And we tried a different intervention every month for 10 months. He had racked up thousands of dollars of debt. And he was willing to try every time. So we tried seeing a counselor. We tried having him, meet with his case manager as soon as the money hit his bank account so that they could go to the ATM together and get the money order. We tried having him freeze his bank card in the freezer so we would have to think about it before he came out. We tried inpatient mental health services, outpatient mental health services. Eventually, we were able, it's not easy to find in our community. I'm not sure what Reno is like, but down here in Las Vegas, it is not easy to find fiduciaries or representative payees, but we were finally able to find one, and he agreed to that. And that was what it took. And he was able to have someone else take control of his money and pay his rent for him, and then give him an allowance, which he could then use to gamble if he wanted to, but his bills were paid. And we had such a celebration the day he finally paid off all of his back rent. So it was over a year in the process. But it was well worth it because he was not going to be successfully housed anywhere else. No one else was going to give him 10 chances to not pay your rent. But for us, we continued to see that the risk level was low enough and he was willing to keep trying. So there is that key that I want to really emphasize, in that joint responsibility, right? That it is not just on us to find a solution that works, that the client or the tenant has to be willing to participate in that as well. And so we want to make sure that we are working together, we're working alongside the client as they're doing that. One of the books I've been inspired by this year, we've been doing a lot of leadership books in my organization, is called Extreme Ownership. And it is by Navy SEALs Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And they teach us that a team's success depends on the leader's willingness to take ownership for failure. And by the leader setting the example, every person should be able to ask themselves, what part did I play in the problem? What could I have done to help prevent it? And so if we come to the table already saying, look, I played a part in this. I didn't support you in the way that you needed support. I didn't remind you to pay your rent. Like, there were things I could have done to make this better. That all of a sudden takes the client or the tenant's defenses down to the point where maybe they're willing to admit what their part in it was. We want to lead by example there. And so if, we say, this is what's going on, and here's what I can own about that. Here's what I can change for next month. What are you willing to change? And we come at it collaboratively. That really helps. Harm reduction framework. Not sure how many in this group are going to be familiar with harm reduction, but the down and dirty of harm reduction is that it's not about the behavior itself, but it's about the outcome of that behavior. So for instance, if you have a tenant using drugs in the unit, is the problem really that the tenant's using drugs in the unit, or that at all hours of the night she's screaming so loud that she's disturbing her neighbors, right? It's the screaming that we're really concerned about, even though we know the drugs are probably causing the screaming. But when we go at her and we come together and we say, hey, let's talk about what's going on that you're disturbing your neighbors. You know, did you know that they could hear you at night when you're screaming? And that puts someone on a less defensive, there's less judgment implied than if we're saying, hey, you're using drugs, you need to not use them in the unit. So that's what we mean by harm reduction. So just one more slide to emphasize it, because I want to say it again, that if the risk remains low and the tenant's willing to try, we don't stop trying new interventions until we have exhausted all options. Joanna, do I have a full hour, or am I supposed to be wrapping up right now?
No, I moved everything to a full hour, so we have 15 minutes left.
Good. I've only got 5 slides left, but I was hoping that we had a little bit more time. All right, so how do we develop interventions? This is the challenging part, right? Especially if you are not coming from a social work or case management background. So first tip that I have for you is that asking or telling the tenant to follow the rule is not an intervention. If they were going to follow the rule, they would have done it the first time. So let's go ahead and take that one off the table. Second one, don't do the same intervention repeatedly and expect different results. There are some sayings around that. I'm not going to say what those mean, but I'm sure that you've heard them. So doing the same thing, expecting different results, probably not going to happen. Third thing is, don't assume you know the root of the problem. So help the tenant identify what they perceive is really the root problem, because they're the experts in their own lives. And as someone who works in human services, I am part of a group of people who like to fix things. And if you too find yourself to be a fixer, it can be really tempting to think that we know what the problem is and to go at it and try to fix it. But if we don't ask, we end up spending a lot of our time solving the wrong problem. So really ask the client or the tenant, you know, what is the biggest challenge for you in meeting this expectation or in opening the door for pest control to come in? You know, you complained to me there were roaches in your apartment, then I scheduled pest control and you didn't let them in. What was the challenge for you there? And asking them, because to you it seems simple, like open the damn door. Oh, I hope I was okay to cuss. But you know, it might not be. There might be something else that's totally going on. And so if we ask, then we have more of a good chance of knowing that we are solving the right problem. This one is challenging at times. So work within their own point of view and not against it. So the tenant's truth is their truth, even if you don't see it that way. And if you try to correct their perspective, that just ends up leading to these unproductive conversations where we're just butting heads. And so trying to understand whatever their perception is, whether they feel like someone else is out to get them, or they feel like they're being targeted, or, you know, some people with untreated mental health diagnoses might have some delusions or paranoid thoughts that are happening. And, you know, it's not that we are agreeing with that, but we're understanding that that is that person's truth. And so if that is their truth, how can I help them overcome that and still comply with the lease and still be a good tenant here at this property. And then my last tip is to admit to your team when you are getting burnt out. If this is a client who has pushed your buttons or has been, you know, you've been the target of some of their verbal abuse, it's okay to lean on others in your team. Hopefully, most of you have a team of people who will be working together and it's not just a one-person show, because that can be really tiring. And so it's okay to tap out or to say, like, I need you to take the lead this time. I'm out of ideas. You can use this cohort. Even if you are working together, you now have each other to brainstorm ideas together and say, like, what can we do with this? I'm out of ideas. These are the things we've tried. But take that step back, and usually there's somebody else who's willing to step up and take the lead and try something new. But definitely be willing to ask for help when your creative juices have stopped flowing. All right. So steps for problem solving. At US Vets, what we call this is a housing stability plan. We used to do things called behavior contracts. What else did we call them? Eviction prevention meetings. Those all had just really negative connotations. And when we came together and we said, let's call it a housing stability plan, that is the purpose of why we're here, is to help you maintain housing stability, then that seemed to reframe for both the staff and the client what our focus should be. So we're first identifying what that problem behavior is. And then we want to explain the why behind why that is an expectation. Helping people understand the why really gets their buy-in. And we want them to be clear about that this is an expectation that has a reason. It's not just because it's in your lease. Like, why is it in your lease? Does it keep the community safe? You know, in terms of the pest control issue, you know, bugs can spread from one unit to another. And so we require that everyone have monthly maintenance with pest control so that nobody gets, you know, the pests in their unit. I mentioned this before, but ask the tenant what's the biggest challenge for them in meeting that expectation. And then ask them what they want as a resolution. So this is sometimes eye-opening too, because sometimes they don't want to live there anymore. And they've identified this is not a good place for me, and they're kind of waiting for someone to kick them out. And if that's the case, well, why don't we work, instead of putting another eviction on your record, which is going to add more barriers to you finding housing later, why don't we work together to find you housing that works for you? Maybe this isn't the right area of town. Maybe you want to reunite with family. You know, you want a different size unit. Any of those types of things. Maybe you just, I got to get away from this neighbor. This neighbor is driving me nuts. Like, I will move anywhere if I can be away from him. Maybe there's another unit within your building that you could even move that person to. So find out from the tenant what it is they want, and then you can work together to help see if we can make that happen. And then, like I said, use the team together to help with the problem solving. When we are asking the client to help us, we want to listen to what they have to say, because a lot of times they also have an idea and we don't even have to do the work. They're like, well, if I just had 3 days notice instead of 1 day notice, I would be able to get my house in order and be able to have pest control come in. If that's feasible for you, then say yes and you're done. You know, like that, they just made it really easy. But if it's not feasible, if what they're asking for is not feasible, then it's okay to explain why, you know, that isn't something you can do, and see if there might be a middle ground you can come to. All right, any Any thoughts, questions so far on that? All right, I have just a couple. I don't think we have time to actually do the practice, but I want to tell you about this idea anyways. This reverse brainstorming has really been one that I have used in times when I'm stuck. So you're going to pick a problem, one of the problems from that middle column, right? So back to that middle column of behaviors, somebody shout one out for me. What's a problem behavior that we might see?
Not allowing for room inspections.
Okay.
For pest control.
Okay, not allowing pest control to come in. So then we're going to rephrase that into a question that starts with how might we? How might we encourage this client to allow pest control to come in? Right? That's pretty simple. Then we're going to reverse it into the anti-problem. How might we ensure this client never lets in pest control? We're going to go backwards, okay? And then talk about what might be solutions to that anti-problem. So ways that we could ensure that this client will never let in pest control. Well, if we never give them notice, if they knock at midnight, if they don't have identification with them, you know, if the pest control people are really rude or they're spraying it, their chemicals in the kitchen or, you know, near open food, those types of things. You figure out all the ways that could make this problem worse, essentially. And then we do it again and again. So you come up with several ideas and then we reverse those into real solutions. So if one of our anti-solutions was they come at midnight, well, the real solution might be that they come at a reasonable time during the day, maybe between 9 and 4, or if people work and need to be let in, maybe they come, you know, between 5 to 8 p.m., something like that. We give them appropriate notice that people always have identification, those types of things. And all of a sudden, you start to realize that you did have some solutions to this problem that you were stuck with before. My boss has challenged me to do this when I have been stuck with problems at work, and it's very frustrating that it actually works. Because you're like, no, I totally need help. And then I really didn't. Just a recap of everything we've done. Our primary goal is keeping people housed. We really want to do that risk assessment before determining any type of consequence or intervention. We want to include the tenant in our problem solving. We're not going to give up until we've exhausted all options or the risk is too high to continue. And when you think you've exhausted every possible option, get creative, use one of those other techniques and keep it going. Try one more thing. So that's the end. I'm really curious what was most useful to you from our time together.
Michelle, I would like to just make a comment. You know, I don't have any background in behavioral health, and I can already see how the way you handle these challenges, you know, and first and foremost, try to keep someone into housing, how that's going to change their attitude, you know, like, oh, I'll get evicted anyway, so what, you know, and it's going to change their attitude, it's going to change their credit history, you know, and rental history. And I don't know if we have a lot of places like that out here in Vegas, you know, that do that. So I just love what you explained.
Thank you, Sheila. I appreciate that feedback. No, we definitely don't have enough of them.
Go on and build supportive housing, all of you.
Actually, my question is in reference to that. Like, I love the presentation as a whole, as far as us that are, you know, boots on the ground, maybe at these sites or, you know, a part of making them come to fruition. But, you know, at Ovation, you know, we are trying to develop permanent supportive housing right now, you know, and we went to, we had neighborhood meetings and we're encountering NIMBYism like you wouldn't believe. like, what, if anything, can we do to educate our community better? Like, this small group, we're all in, we want to do this, but I guess we won't even get to the point of having these conversations with our residents if we can't get these things built. And that's really, from my vantage point right now, is the struggle is, we have the city that's willing to donate land. We have, plans, and we're getting all these housing funds from the government, but then the community comes in and says, no way, not in my backyard. And then the city kind of has to go, okay, well, these are the individuals that elected me. Now what do we do? So suggestions on bigger picture.
Yeah, that is a challenge. I don't have a great answer. For me, I think it's a mindset shift to really believing that every person deserves housing. And when every person deserves housing, and like we did in that first example that Ina pointed out for us, like, you hear physical violence and you say no, but you hear Marco has PTSD and his dog just got diagnosed with cancer, and now all of a sudden I've got some empathy. And so finding some people with lived experience in supportive housing, maybe to speak on it, to help share their experience and personalize it a little bit more, might be a step. But
any organizations that, do you have in your network any, any groups, any lobbyists, anyone that we can kind of reach out to kind of help us, push this stuff forward?
Yeah. US Vets we do not lobby, though we do work closely with our representatives and, share our story and share what we're doing. Nevada Homeless Alliance is a really great partner.
Okay. No, every little bit helps, right?
Yeah.
Has a lot of information on their site, Charity, and I'll send it to you about the kind of evidence behind supportive housing, and that can be not providing someone with the information doesn't always change their mind, but it can be part of your tool when you're doing that community advocacy. And then I also recently just took a class with NeighborWorks about turning NIMBYs to YIMBYs, and I'll send you the list of resources that came with that class.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. I also was like, I'm gonna write this down.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for the presentation. It was very informative.
Yeah. For me, I'm not really in case management. I'm also like on the developing affordable housing end. But aside from all the useful information about case management, what I can take from this is coming into like a problem, admitting like where you went wrong. So I feel like working in a team, that's amazing, to come in that way, to kind of get the team to all admit, okay, where can we improve? And then I really like the reverse brainstorming, because we do come through a lot of problems when we are, like with Charity's problem right now, we have the neighbors not happy about it. So the reverse brainstorming is really helpful to kind of come at a problem that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Try some reverse brainstorming on that, Charity, for sure.
Yeah, I really loved, even though I knew, most of you are not case managers and will not be turning to a case management as a field. I think as developers in any type of housing, I think this topic and learning more about harm reduction and housing first as philosophies is going to be really important for you to advance the mission of ending homelessness and affordable housing wherever you are on that spectrum in your development, because these tools, housing first and harm reduction, we already use them on our own lives and for ourselves. So they can really be applied in many situations across populations that you work with and in different kinds of housing, and beyond housing too. Harm reduction, like using seatbelts as a form of harm reduction, right? So it really expands. So I'm excited that you had the opportunity to really hear this perspective from the tenants and the case managers, because when you guys are managing properties, if you do have conflicts that come up, or if you work with support case managers, you're going to want to know what kind of case managers to hire, right? Who has these philosophies, who are coming from these philosophies, but also how to work with them as a team, because you guys are going to be working together to keep that tenant housed. And also, as from a property management perspective, you have a lot more things you have to consider, like fair housing, safety, the community, and that kind of stuff. So you want to make sure you know all sides of the story, even as you're working in different roles that aren't case management specific. Cool. Did you, I was taking notes on these resources, but if you have any other resources, Michelle, and you want to send me an email, and then your slides, if you want a PDF or send me your slides, I'll send those out in the follow-up email as well.
Absolutely. Yep. I'm happy to share.
Cool. Any last questions before we sign off? Well, thank you. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the presentation, and we'll meet in 2 weeks. And so you guys can get together with your group and see if any further questions come up. And then just like last month, if you guys could, one person could forward those questions to me, and I'll forward to Michelle ahead of time in case they require some research, or phone a friend, like on that old How to Be a Millionaire.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm known for making up things when I don't know the answer, but I do tell people if I made it up. So, but yeah, having those questions ahead of time will be helpful. And I look forward to talking to you all again. You're a fun group.